Hello, my little strangelings, and welcome to a new and improved Ghost Bite experience where I, AJ Mason, can now try to tell you a ghost story in 10 minutes or less now that the TikTok gods have blessed me with that ability. Today, I would like to take us all the way to Chicago and the shores of the Chicago River. It was a rather cold and a bit dreary summer day, the date of July 24th, 1915. The Western Electric Company had chartered the SS Eastland, a steamer ship, to ferry its employees and their families 40 miles across Lake Michigan to a site for a company-sponsored picnic. For many of these families, this was the only holiday-esque thing that they could do together, for almost all of the people on board the SS Eastland that day were working poor, many among them Czech immigrants who barely spoke English. Most of those families flocked to the upper deck of the poorly designed top-heavy Eastern to wave to other family members or friends on shore. Boarding had begun at 6:30 that morning, and by 7:15 the ship had reached its full capacity of 2,572 passengers. By 7:23, it would all go wrong. The Eastland tipped, my little strangelings, going over and under the water's surface in under 2 minutes. Most didn't even have time to react. Many of the passengers and crew were trapped below decks where they either worked or had gone to listen to the band play. Women had been crushed by heavy furniture, some narrowly missing being crushed by the piano, while at least 2 women had been trapped by a heavy refrigerator that had slid and pinned them against a wall below decks when the ship first took on a 45-degree angle. People found themselves trapped under only 20 feet of water, and as the Eastland filled and more went into the drink, it would turn out that this would be a disaster that many would say rivaled even that of the Titanic. In the end, a total of 841 died on the Eastland versus 829 on the Titanic. However, only 3 Eastland crew members died versus 694 on Titanic. And there's clearly some fudging on the math here, because Titanic's overall losses numbered close to or over 1,500 total. So what I am led to believe is that in terms of passenger deaths, yes, the Eastland suffered more casualties than Titanic, but only by a very slim margin, and devastatingly, only 3 years after the Titanic tragedy. Similarly, one of the things oft overlooked about the Eastland tragedy is that Titanic was directly involved in its cause. How, you may ask? Well, you see, the Eastland was poorly designed from the start, my little strangelings, the ship being too top-heavy. After the sinking of the Titanic, there were more maritime regulations added about requisite numbers of lifeboats, and for good reason. However, those lifeboats added significantly more weight to an already top-heavy vessel like the Eastland. Add to that, so many of the 2,572 passengers rushing to the top deck, many of them excited working poors who had never been on such a grand adventure in their lives, to wave to loved ones and friends on shore. Well, it was a perfect storm for a disaster such as this. The results of the capsizing of the SS Eastland were heart-wrenching, and this is where I warn you, my little strangelings, the images you are about to see are many things: genuine, historical, and most of all, extremely rough in nature. When I say that 841 people died aboard the Eastland, and that the rescue and recovery efforts to that end were both harrowing and horrific in equal measure, that is exactly what I mean. 22 entire families, father, mother, and children, were completely wiped out, dying together that day. There were so many bodies, several buildings along the river had to be commandeered to be utilized as makeshift morgues. Some families were so thoroughly wiped out, it was a struggle to identify them, and it was only best guess from employee records as to who they were, and many went buried together unnamed. Children were orphaned, and pleas were published in the newspaper just to find their names, as they were too young or traumatized to tell the adults around them who they even were. The capsizing of the SS Eastern on the Chicago River is widely recognized as one of the greatest maritime disasters to have ever occurred, and yet, aside from a single historical marker on the river in the heart of the Windy City, it has widely been forgotten about today. Unless you happen to be employed in one of those buildings, used as one of those makeshift morgues, or spend any amount of time on the riverfront. There are a number of terrifying encounters with the paranormal attributed to the Eastland disaster. Several restaurant and bar goers in the neighborhood have called police claiming they've seen ghostly hands or heard the shouts, cries, and screams of someone drowning in the nearby river. They've seen hands reaching out of the water, sometimes many hands too numerous to count. Of course, when police, fire, and rescue arrive to these modern desperate cries for help, there's nothing and no one present in the water. Some claim to see ghostly faces when they look down into the river just below the water's surface, staring up and contorted in fear and agony. Several of the buildings used as morgues have phenomena such as shadow people, disembodied footsteps heard from upper floors when no one should be in the building, and employees have claimed the sounds of lost children and small shadowy figures peeking out of doorways and down hallways. They've also remarked on lights flickering, doors creaking and slamming shut, and all other typical and sundry phenomenon associated with both residual and intelligent hauntings. When paranormal enthusiasts descended on the riverfront and these buildings on the 100-year anniversary of the Eastland disaster, several EVPs were captured. Many of those EVPs were clear and direct answers to questions like, "Did you die on the Eastland?" in the affirmative. Several EVPs captured made no sense to the investigators at first, but were later discovered to be words and phrases in Czech, the native language of the immigrant families and workers to have died. Some of the more famous buildings affected by the hauntings are the Reed, Murdoch and Company building, notable for its grand clock tower at 325 North LaSalle Street. It had a room or two designated as makeshift morgues during the disaster, but the primary location, and the biggest morgue, was at the Regiment Armory at 110 North Carpenter Street at Washington Boulevard in the West Loop. It also would be the one to bear the brunt of the aforementioned paranormal activities of shadow people and disembodied sounds. The Regiment Armory was the primary location pressed into service to contain remains from the Eastland to attempt identification, and later on would become Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Studios. One of the most notable hauntings when it was Harpo was the ghostly figure of a woman in a gray, old-timey dress that was caught on the studio's security cameras. A woman that Oprah herself nicknamed the Gray Lady. Sadly, the Regiment Armory building, which later became Harpo Studios, was demolished to make way for McDonald's corporate headquarters, and I could find no information on whether or not ghostly activity persists into the new building or not. If you happen to work for McDonald's corporate office in Chicago and you know anything or have any tales to pass on to me, please, by all means, contact me by email at soundparanormal@gmail.com. So that is a brief look into the Eastland disaster of the Chicago River and Lake Michigan, my little strangelings. A big thank you to Matt Geist of @Georgia_Gothic for requesting this one. Certainly, there's enough here for me to deep dive and go into loads more detail for a full-length podcast episode, which I may do in the future. But for now, I hope I've piqued your interest, and if you're native to Chicago, perhaps I've set you off on an adventure of your own to the riverfront. As always, my little strangelings, happy hauntings.